I don't really have any slides. I'll talk through a little bit of the prep work and the context of this. I just wanted to give kind of a working example of how I've come to start looking at building custom software solutions that include potentially AI components. And I think for me anyway, most of the times that I'm seeing it as a possible solution or a part of the solution is when we're dealing with manually intensive processes that could be automated at least partially, but still probably have a human in the loop at the end. So that's kind of where I've been focused in terms of thinking about where we could potentially utilize some of these solutions. So I'll kind of talk through a little bit of that about that. There's also a more a business-oriented talk that I'll be giving next week that's more on the, hey, you've got a problem you're trying to solve on behalf of a customer that provides business value. How do you identify good candidates for like an AI agentic approach? We're not going to get too far into the agent side. That's the bait and switch part for today. So we're not going to get too far into the agent side of things, but we'll get through part of what needs to be there in order for that to work. And then I'll kind of talk through the other part of it in a future talk, I think. I guess without further ado, yeah, if that's too much of a bait and switch, feel free to drop. But I suspect it's still interesting regardless. Let me share my screen here. Okay. I'll bring up cursor to start with. And let's do something fun. So I was joking, but not joking, that I actually vibe coded most of this application. Meaning I wrote very, very little code on it. I just kind of chatted with Claude and built most of it. But good news, the business domain of this thing is very small. I wanted to get like a nice, like tight little example for this. And so I asked it to describe what the application does, and it's pretty close. So it's can you all see this okay? I could probably, this is my chat window on the right. So
yeah, I'd say low font bump. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So basically the idea that I had was, on most county auditor sites in America, you can type in an address and look up information about the parcel itself and then about structures, outbuildings, that kind of thing. I have no specific use case for this, but I thought it would be a potentially interesting one for an agent because almost all of the auditor sites are the same. They use the same software, but they're all individual. And so when you type an address in, you basically get the same information back from all of the different auditors that I've seen anyway around here. So I thought it would be interesting to work through an example where it would go, you would have this kind of standalone autonomous agent, you feed it some addresses and it goes and finds the correct auditor site, pulls down the structure information for the outbuildings, and then populates the system. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit though, because what we would have normally done traditionally in a case like this is we would have identified that there's some tasks that need to happen by somebody in the system, right? And so one of them would be to add the address of the parcel and then to go through a process of adding individual structures for that parcel. So does that kind of workflow make sense? I tried to pick something that would be fairly easy to pick up as far as the domain goes. Any questions about that? This is very interactive, so if you have any questions, just jump in. All right, I'll keep going. So I built the smallest of CRUD apps, but I wanted to build it with kind of a wizard flow that represents the workflow that somebody has to go through, so that you're not just these disparate business objects that you have to like individually handle. And that was where most of my trouble came in with the vibe coding. But I will show you what I did. So what I started with was hand-drawn sketches. And these are the hand-drawn sketches that I started with. So I basically said I need a form with a property address. And then I said, as part of that, I also need to add a structure, and this is the kind of information that I want to capture in that. And then I said, but I don't really want to make you like jump around a lot, so let's list all the structures in line and be able to add a new structure kind of as you go. And so I said, this is what this page should kind of look like for that. And then there's this review, this idea of a review at the end, where you've added your address, you've added all of your individual structures, and now you're going to review that and either revise it, go back, or you're going to confirm it and move forward. So that's kind of this like little wizard mini workflow. And I think it's just enough to demonstrate what I want to get across today, which is like how do you augment something like this with AI? Does that all make sense? Give me like a little emoji thumbs up or something, just so I know I'm not too far off. Okay, cool. All right, so let's look at the application itself. I'll just open up a couple of the class files here, the models, and then we'll go to the app. Um, so it's about as stupid simple as you can get as far as active record and Rails go. A parcel exists. It is kind of the first class object in the database as far as the ERD is concerned. I don't have users. I don't have anything else. It's just these two things. So a parcel has many structures and then has some validation on various components of the address itself. And then the structure has an enumerable building type. I just kind of wanted to make it interesting for the LLM as far as what it would have to adhere to as far as structured output when we get it back. But there's a building type. It has the length and the width and some naive math around that. So that's basically it for the models. There's structures and there's parcels, and a parcel has many structures, and a structure belongs to a parcel. That all makes sense. Cool. All right. So the application is running, and I will go over to that now. And this is what it looks like. So if we were looking at the traditional flow of this thing, this is totally dev designed. So nobody gets to blame any of the designers at Launch Scout because nobody helped me on this. It was all me. Oh, me and Claude. We vibe coded this together. So anyway, if you want to go through this process, what you would do normally is click New Parcel, and you would type in an address, and you would add a structure. So we'll say it's a house. It's I'm sure residential, 200 feet by 50. We'll do something like that. All right, and then what you end up with is a structure inside of this. You can add multiple structures. As you can imagine, if you have a lot of outbuildings, this gets tedious for detached garages and all the other things that you might have, sheds and pole barns and things like that. Once you're done with that, you would go forward to the review screen, and you would essentially just verify that everything is right. If you need to go back, you could click edit and kind of go back through the process, or just click the back button. And then once you're happy with the result, you would do confirm. And this is great, right? So if you think about who would be performing this task, it might be a back-end task if somebody's asking for maintenance quotes or something like that. If you're doing one of these an hour, it's probably okay. If you're doing 1,000 of these a day, then things get a little bit tougher for you. And so this is kind of a good candidate because that information is pretty well known. It may not be entirely complete for every house on every auditor site, or every address on every auditor site, but like that most of the time is captured as part of the auditor data because they use that for appraisals and things like that for tax purposes. So that's just kind of the general model of the problem that we're trying to solve. One kind of side note about this, and there's nothing really particularly secret about any of this code, but it doesn't use any JavaScript that I wrote. This is all using Hotwire and turbo frames, and so even when you get into editing structures in line, all of that happens as a result of the turbo stream commands and the turbo frames. So if you haven't looked at Hotwire recently, it's a pretty good time. You can do a lot without having to write any sort of dynamic JavaScript. You're just writing Rails templates and issuing turbo stream update commands. So it's pretty cool. That's kind of the general gist of what like a kind of a business workflow that we would have supported in the past for somebody when we're building custom software. Any questions? Anything you want me to look at again? Okay. So if we go into and look at some of the controllers now, that parcel wizard controller keeps coming back. This was this was an echo of a vibe code. Anyway, there is just the normal CRUD, right? You've got index, you've got new, you've got create, you've got edit, and you've got update. So like just all the normal things that you would expect to see when you're building CRUD on parcels and on structures. I built it into that kind of that little wizard form. You can see some of the turbo stream commands to update the list and update the form itself, show it or hide it, that kind of thing. but there's nothing particularly special about this. Uh, and I guess what I would think about when I'm designing or thinking about designing an LLM automation or integration into the application would be, this is a tedious process of going through and adding each one of these things individually. You're probably actually in a production environment capturing more than just those fields. So every time you have to touch the field, you're looking at a little bit more time spent. There's a lot of opportunity for error, and so you might fat finger some numbers, and then you need the review process anyway, just to make sure that everything matches up. And that's kind of where I would draw a pretty good boundary around something that could be automated when there's like a whole complete workflow that has to be completed in order to provide that business value. So not just like a parcel, not just a structure, but like that combination of a number of different things all together make up sort of that business value of the thing that we're trying to create. And so that to me seems like a pretty good opportunity to integrate an LLM for it. So let's move into that a little bit. I have a branch where that code lives, so I'm going to check that out. Probably break everything at the same time. We have looked at a couple of different Ruby gems. I have looked at a couple of different Ruby gems, and even debated with an LLM about which one to use, and ended up actually looking at and using just the direct OpenAI client. So let's see if I can find it in the dependencies. Oops, if I type the right thing. Okay, so we're using Ruby OpenAI. There are other alternatives. There's Ruby LLM is one that's, I think, more of like a service agnostic, LLM agnostic one. And there's also Active Agent, which kind of has that whole Rails kind of built-in asynchronous job processing and all that stuff built into it, just like, active jobs and things like that. And that's not built into Rails. It's a library on top of it, I believe. But they're kind of trying to go through that idiomatic Rails approach to doing it. As is Ruby LLM is more of like a DSL for chat, and so you can just kind of do chat like send this and then get chat responses back, and supports the kind of streaming responses and stuff like that. I haven't really investigated a whole lot about this Ruby OpenAI one. I suspect that if I were going to integrate it into production code, I would not be looking at a specific library for a specific provider, but trying to find if there's a good abstraction so we could plug different models in and try different things out. So this one in particular, I know that OpenAI has what I'm looking for, and so I didn't bother too much to look elsewhere. But if we look at OpenAI's API, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, yeah, if you go to their API, their chat interface has this concept of structured outputs. And one of the cool things about structured outputs is you can say, give me the information that I want back in a specific schema format. So you can say, I'm looking for you to answer this question, and when you answer it, give me JSON. And when I get that JSON back, I can parse it. And it's very similar to if I just made any kind of other API call to a structured data service. So it's useful. I think they probably all are at least working on this or have something similar to it. But this is the one that I had gotten a little bit more familiar with first. So I decided this was the one to try. What's nice, so it only gets supported under certain models. I'm using O4, I think O4 Mini right now. But you can also use this. There's like an older response format that you can also use. There's a siren going off. Is it too distracting over here? You probably can't even hear it, can you?
Can't
I
hear
don't
it.
hear it now.
Man, Zoom's audio is so good. Just makes me look foolish when I point it out. Anyway, this structured output is part of their normal chat API, and you can call into it and say, give me this back, and it will adhere to that pretty rigidly. I haven't gotten a response back yet that was outside of what I expected for it to do. So I don't know exactly how they do that on their end. That's the kind of the magic of these services, is you don't really have to know how they implement things like give me structured output. But what's nice about that is that then you can define that schema and just say, give it back to me that way. So I defined inside of here, it's kind of a workflow input output structure. I haven't really exactly figured out the terminology that I want to use for this when I'm thinking about it. But what I did was I basically said, okay, I need to know when I get this information back, whether a human gives it to me or whether this LLM goes and finds it, I need to have this specific information. And it's basically the model and the relationships in JSON schema format for the thing that I'm trying to do, right? So I can say, give me a parcel back. It's a type of object. It has these fields on it, and here are the requirements that I give you for it. They have to match these specific patterns, things like that. And then I can say, all right, here's an array of structures that you need to give me and the enumerable types that can come back, that kind of thing. So very similar to the models and the validations and the relationships that we've already modeled with Active Record. I kind of guess that at some point you could probably just generate this thing from a subset of your model, some kind of DSL, but at the moment, this is the easiest way that I know of to make it. Does that all make sense? That's kind of a little bit, that's like the next most advanced piece of this, is just defining a way to interact with an LLM that gives you the data back in the way that you're expecting it.
Yeah, I sort of
All
wondered
right.
how you parse out the response from an AI, because I've seen
Mhm.
it like with ChatGPT. We did some prototyping, just like uploading images and asked it to
Mhm.
do some matching and identify them, and it came back with like accurate but plain text English.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like,
So the
how
structured output
reliable
is
is
one way to
that?
do this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good
I
to
was
know.
thinking the same thing. You can also, when you're chatting with it, you can also say, here's the format I want you to return it in. This is just more of a formalization of that. And I
Gotcha.
don't know, I don't know what they do to enforce that or validate that, but it seems to work. You hear a lot of that when you're talking to me about AI things. Is like it seems to work sometimes, most of the time maybe,
I
and
think
that's
that's
the best
probably
I can
most
usually
people's
get.
assessment.
Mhm. Yeah, like using
It works
Claude
ish.
within Cursor. Um, one day I'll give it what I think are the same outputs as the previous day, and where I got really good results the previous day, it's garbage, and I just turn it off and I go my own way that day. So it's an interesting world to live in, where you can't really predict your productivity boost from a tool like that, and it may actually slow you down. But generally speaking, it seems to be a pretty good boost for me anyway. So that's the schema. One thing that I did also was create this like LLM service. Um, and so you can call into this and chat with the structured output. So you give it the prompt that you have, and then you give it your schema format. It embellishes that with a system prompt and says, hey, and this is almost directly from their API documentations as far as the content goes, but you are a helpful assistant that provides a response in a structured format. Provide it exactly. And then you put your user prompt in there, which I'll show in just a second. And then you give it the response format and tell it what you want it to do. I'll actually uncomment this so we can see what that response is since you mentioned it. And then what it does is it just rips out that content and parses the JSON and returns it. So there's not a whole lot here, right? If you're looking at this as far as code goes, it's less than 50 lines, which is cool. So I'll go into the controller side. And what I did was added a chat endpoint and a process chat endpoint. And we'll see that here in a minute. But basically, it just renders a new button you can click that says, like, fill this in with AI. Lets you just type in a free form address, totally susceptible to prompt injection. So I'm not putting this on the internet like running. But you just type in an address, or you can give it a link or other things. I haven't tried giving it an image. I thought that would be interesting to give it like a satellite image to see if it could just guess at the structures. But this could turn into something that's like a multimodal input where you can give it different information and have it assemble that into something structured. But yeah, I didn't mean to click that. So you go into that, you click the button, and then it will instantiate a new object for the LLM service. This I need to explain a little bit. I cheated. I 100% cheated, and I created a little fake RAG, and I'll explain that in a minute. But basically, it goes into the user prompt, which is you have to look up the actual parcel information from authoritative sources. Please don't just hallucinate this. Don't make it up. If you can't find it, simply return the address information that the user passed in, parsed out. Don't try to like guess at structures. And that was one of the things that I found pretty early on, is it just started like making structures up. Like it just kind of averaged the size of a house and made a main residence for every address that I gave it. And I was like, well, that's fun. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, because you might think, well, that's a deal breaker, but actually I think that's kind of the feeder into the next step of the process that we don't have time to talk about today. So let me talk a little bit about this auditor data. What I did for that, I'm gonna find it here. I'm missing it for some reason. Oh, there it is. So all I did was basically create a little database of what I would have like potentially purchased from an auditor site or something like that. But it isn't necessarily to demonstrate anything particular other than that you can pass this in as part of the prompt. And then if it's in the list, it'll prefer that information and give it right back to you. And what I want to get at here, I guess, is that the LLMs aren't particularly good right now at going and searching and finding the right auditor site, but an agent could be. If you designed an AI agent and gave it specific steps, you could have it go find the right auditor site, go pull that data. And so I'm just kind of short circuiting that whole process and pretending like it did the right thing from the LLM perspective, just to kind of demonstrate what it looks like when it goes out and comes back. So it's a little bit of cheating, but it's also part of the reason why people seem to be getting excited about AI agents, is that you can start having them go do data augmentation, where you can just give them a little bit of information and have it go to specific places that you don't necessarily know in advance to find the information and bring it back and put it in. So I wanted to point that out just so that everybody's like, hey, you're cheating. Yeah, totally am. What it does after that is it chats, gets the JSON schema back. Well, I guess we'll print the result twice here, once in the service as well. And then we grab the parcel, the structures, and we just iterate through all of them, create them all. And then instead of taking you right back to the index, we put that human in the loop part in. So we'd send you to the review page and let you review what it came up with. So that's kind of the gist of it. Any questions before we do like a little demo of it and work through what it looks like? All right, here we go. If I reload this page now, you have a fun little add with AI button. I'll click that, and then I'm going to grab one of those super specific addresses, and we'll do a couple other ones for fun, but this one, we know that we have essentially some augmentation for the right address structures and things like that. So I'll click process with AI. And it went out to OpenAPI or OpenAI's through their API and used the O4 mini with the structured output, sent all of that information, including the little mini rag that had the database of pre-populated things. It preferred that data and brought it back in the structured format. And now I'm on the review page. If I want to, I can edit any of that stuff, or I can just go through to confirm. And now you can see that I just basically skipped through the process of having to enter that stuff manually. It's going to get things wrong. So let's have a fun one again here where we enter, let me go back to parcels. I'll just delete this one out of there and then try adding it with AI. This is our office address. I knew I was missing some words in there. Okay, so we'll process that with AI. Because I gave it specific instructions to not hallucinate structures unless it was very confident that it knew that those were accurate. It didn't give me any structure information back. It just basically parsed out the address into individual fields, which could be useful in and of itself in certain circumstances, but there's usually better tools to do that. So, it kind of augmented things. It kind of helped a little bit, but because it didn't have any way of going and fetching that information, it wasn't as particularly useful as the other one was. All right, so what do you think? Do you see potential ways that you could use this? Do you think it feels like a lot of smoke but no fire? I'm just kind of curious about where your head's been at with this stuff and talk through it, and then we can kind of go back and look at the code. Oh, you wanted to see the code output, Alan, right?
Sure.
Yeah, let's bring that up here. All right, so this was the response that it gave back, which is just that structured JSON. You can have it return.
Yeah, it's very easy to process.
Yeah, you can have it return chat as well. So you can essentially have it like embellished. So there's like thinking on some of them, and then there's like the chat response, and then there's the structured output. So you can have it basically say, I went and searched for this, and this is the response that I'm giving you because of, you know, whatever sources that I found, and then I have it also return that. So there's some interesting options there if you need to store metadata about the request and response, you can do that too.
Do you have specific sort of business cases that you have in mind for this stuff? Because like I can think of a lot of like developer oriented things with the retrieval
Mhm.
augmented generation especially, but at least so far I feel like it's mainly just like augment the generation and like pass that to a prompt, and then it's like an iterative step over just the chat interface, but I haven't really connected it to like what we're doing at work yet.
Yeah. So in the end state, we would not necessarily have anything to pass into it, right? And I guess maybe that's worth talking about a little bit. Um, what you would need in order to support an autonomous agent interacting with an application like this is more than just this, right? You kind of need to be able to enumerate the kinds of things that can be done by the application through those sort of agentic API endpoints. And then there's also something called MCP. Has anybody heard of that before? AI MCP. It's an Anthropic thing. They're trying to make into a standard. It is a standard, but they're trying to make it like the de facto or official standard for some of this. But you can create an MCP server that an agent, an autonomous agent, like I think Cloud Desktop is one. There's a number of them. It's all kind of emergent at this point, but um, they can go and essentially you point them at the MCP server, and it can give a spec basically of the ways that the agent can perform tasks within your application. And so you would essentially enumerate all the actions that can be taken and a little bit of like why you would use that action. And so we might expose the add a parcel workflow to an external AI agent. And then somebody could design that agent to take in a spreadsheet of a bunch of addresses and then go to all the various auditor sites for the different addresses, pull in all the structure information, and then use the MCP server endpoint to push that data into the application and sort of self-discover how to do that. So it's not a whole lot different, I guess, in some ways than just a regular API that the AI would be taught to use, but it's more of a standard on how some of those interoperability pieces work. But yeah, the end game here would not be that you would have all these addresses and all the structure information already. Is that would be unknown, just like it would be in real life. And instead of having somebody at a desk going and searching the auditor site with that address, you would at least give a first pass to the agent, but let it go and research all that information and bring it back to you. Does that
So
make
I
sense?
think what you're saying is you would like right now you have the interface, the web interface is demo purposes, but you would actually instead maybe expose like an MCP endpoint to
Mhm.
this. So this is then just like one small LLM building block in your bigger agent process.
Yeah, and obviously an application of this complexity wouldn't be particularly useful in and of itself. And so what you would do is you would stack up all of the places where in an application you might want to augment a traditional like user flow with this and be able to, you know, automate a lot of processes that would otherwise be manually and pretty tedious at this point. All right,
No,
what do you
I
guys want to
guess that
try?
is interesting. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
think
no.
that is interesting because I could see how the agent makes it maybe easier to get away from the chat interface. It's almost like the agent is almost on like the other side of the interaction. So like maybe for normal things that people are doing in our application, we can somehow work in an agent backend that like augments actions that they're already taking, but it's not just like a chat interface.
Yeah, the MCP interface, I haven't researched this a whole lot yet. But the general architecture here is kind of interesting. You have these MCP servers and you have the MCP client. What the servers can do, where I'm trying to find it here, example servers. No, for server developers. Okay, so there's resources and there's tools, right? That's kind of their terminology. And then there's these pre-written template prompts. If you just have information, then you've got resources. If you have something like essentially they call it a function, a tool function that can be called, that would be the thing we're talking about, where you would expose essentially a tool that would let them perform some kind of an action. In this case, it would just be putting data into the system, but in theory, you could be potentially doing other kinds of actions for a non-SaaS thing. So it's kind of an abstraction on top um, of what you would hope that an agent would be able to do, which is like go research some stuff and use some tools to build or make or destroy or whatever it is that you're asking it to do. So this is a pretty small piece of that particular puzzle, but I think it could be kind of interesting when you're thinking about it in context with things that I guess when I'm talking to somebody who wants to solve a problem and they're like, and then we do this really tedious step where somebody has to go and administratively do a bunch of work. That's a potential workflow that you could identify that would be a good candidate for, if nothing else, augmenting, doing some of the pre-work or pre-research.
Yeah, that's how I think about it, as sort of a augmentation or a force multiplier. It's not like a complete automation. Like I'm not going to let this thing go and say, give me back this answer. But if it can do 75% of the work, I think that's a good result.
Yeah, I kind of put it in the talk description, but that's an interesting problem that we're experiencing right now is LLMs are actually pretty terrible at basic math, but like somehow good at high level decision making. And so we don't want to give them full control over things, but if we can expose very specific things that we want them to be able to do and how they would accomplish that, let them determine the plan that they want to do. We could even make it so that it would review it as a plan before it actually acts on it, right? So we could say, here's all the things you could do. And then you start chatting with it and say, well, I'd like to add a new address to the system. And it'd say, oh, well, I just enumerated the possible tools or actions I could take. One of those is to add a parcel. Here's the information that I need in order to do that successfully. Could you link me to the auditor site? Or, you can start getting more interactive with those things and then potentially do something that way as well that maybe isn't full on autonomous agent, but would potentially be like a chat bot kind of an approach, right? Where you say, I need help doing this thing. And if it knows that that's a possible action that it can help you take in the application, it can just essentially capture that information in chat, which is a little bit more, sometimes a little bit more comfortable for people, especially if you have a very, very large with a lot of complex workflows. If you could help to enumerate those and give advice on which one is the correct one to use to an AI bot. If nothing else, it can link you to that place. But it might be able to help you actually work through that entire workflow too, depending on how you design it. It puts a little bit of meat to this idea of like, what does it actually mean for an AI agent? All these words are kind of easy to throw around, but like, what does it mean for something to assist me in my own application when I'm designing it so that I can provide that to end users as a benefit? We're not giving full reign to some tool to just go and modify data in the database, right? We're giving it very structured endpoints to be able to do very specific things and then describing to it why those are useful and what it would use those for. And then you're not asking it to do math, right? You're not saying, multiply these two numbers and save it to the database. You're saying, all right, if I want to add a parcel that has a certain amount of square footage, what I need to capture is length and width and floors or something like that, right? And then it can use that to put the information in the database into your system in a way that you can verify it before it becomes like part of your data set or part of your experience for your users. Well, all right. So what I was thinking about for a follow-up on this is kind of building the next level of abstraction on top of it and saying, all right, well, if we wanted to give some kind of a tool a higher level ability to say, this is the thing I want to accomplish, and then let it decide the next step. That was kind of the idea that I had. I don't know if it combines together with the MCP server part of it or not. If we extend it all the way out, that would put us at like May at least before we would finish up this set. So we might go a different route with it, but I hope it kind of scratched a little bit of an itch as far as curiosity goes. Kind of sounds like not a whole lot of people are using this too in depth yet. So I'm curious as you start to look at it more and play with it more, inevitably, drop in the Discord server what you're doing with it, because I'm trying to learn from everybody what we're able to accomplish together. So.